Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. I figured since we talked about football yesterday when I discussed all the USFL strange rules, today we would stay on the subject of football and talk a little about the NFL. And the reason why I'm going to talk about the NFL and this particular subject is because the 2022 NFL Draft is coming up Thursday, April the 28th, and it will go through Saturday, April the 30th. So it's just a little bit more than a month away. So I'm going to go back to the year 2011, and I'm not going to use last year. So we're going 2011 through 2020, so 10 years, that I'm going to talk about all the quarterbacks that have been drafted either as the top overall draft pick or at least in the first round. And I might even give a couple of grades along the way just to show how bad the NFL scouts are at scouting quarterbacks. And if anybody has any ideas on why these NFL scouts are this bad at quarterbacks, please feel free to let me know. I'm not going to use last year only because it was a year ago, so it's really too early to say how good or bad somebody's going to be in 1 year. So we're not going to use last year. So that's why I'm going back to 2011 and going through 2020, so it gives us 10 years. And the reason why I'm doing quarterbacks is because that's the position that everybody always follows. And you know how it is when you're a quarterback. It doesn't matter what your stats look like. If your team wins, you're great. If your team loses, you suck. That's just the way it is. If you have 500 yards passing and your team loses, you had a bad game. If you have 150 yards passing but your team wins, you had a great game. That's just the way it is. 2011, we had Cam Newton, Jake Locker, Blaine Gabbert, and Christian Ponder that all went in the first round of the NFL Draft. Now, the only person of those four that has done anything of relevance in the NFL is Cam Newton. Jake Locker and Blaine Gabbert and Christian Ponder basically just had a cup of water, maybe a cup of Gatorade, and they went home. Now, Cam Newton, if you had to rate his career on a scale of 0 through 10, I guess most people would give him a 5, maybe a 6, because he hasn't been great, but he hasn't been terrible. Now, Jake Locker, Blaine Gabbert, and Christian Ponder are all a 0 because they did absolutely nothing. But I would say Cam Newton is about a 5 or a 6 because he's had some great games, and he had about 3 years where he was really good. But outside of that, he hasn't done a whole lot. But if Cam Newton would have been drafted in the 5th round or the 6th round, you would look at his career in its totality and you would say, hey, on a scale of 0 through 10, he's a 10. Because if you're drafted 5th or 6th round, people don't expect a whole lot out of you. But when you go in the first round, especially top 10 or top 5, people expect a lot out of you. So when you've played in the league for a decade and you've had about 3 good years, that puts you at about a 5 or a 6. Whereas, like I said, Jake Locker and Blaine Gabbert and Christian Ponder are a 0. People wouldn't even know who Christian Ponder was if he wouldn't have married ESPN personality Samantha Ponder, who of course used to be Samantha Steele. And when people hear the name Samantha Ponder, they say, oh yeah, she's married to Christian. 2012, we had Andrew Luck, Robert Griffin III, and Ryan Tannehill. Now, Andrew Luck, in my personal opinion, on a scale of 0 to 10, I would give him about a 4, maybe a 5. Even back when he was in college at Stanford and everybody was so big on Andrew Luck, I never was impressed with him. To me, he'd make 3 or 4 really good throws and then 2 or 3 just pitiful throws. And even in the NFL, people talked about, oh, he's got so much potential. But when he got on the field, like I've said before, potential meant you suck, because he would always make those good throws and then turn around and make those head scratching throws, and he always turned the ball over at an alarming rate. But outside of the interceptions, his overall numbers weren't great, but they weren't terrible. So I'd say he's about a 4 or a 5. RG3, I'd say a 1 maybe. His rookie season, he was great. And then after that, he did nothing. And then Ryan Tannehill, you got to give him, a 5 or a 6. He's never put up great numbers, but at least he's played for a decade and he's still playing. But just like Cam Newton, if Ryan Tannehill would have been drafted in the 6th or 7th round and he's still playing, he'd probably be about a 10. But when you've played for a decade and you haven't really done a whole lot, you haven't been great, but you haven't been terrible, you're about a 5 or a 6. And then 2013, we had E.J. Manuel, who on a scale of 0 to 10 was about a -20. 2014, we have Blake Bortles, Teddy Bridgewater, and Johnny Manziel. Now, Blake Bortles did nothing. Teddy Bridgewater is still playing, but ever since his really bad injury a few years back, he's never done a whole lot. He doesn't win you any games, but he really doesn't lose you any games. He's just out there doing his best. And then Johnny Manziel was an absolute 0 because he had all that potential, but he just threw it all away because mentally he's about 4 years old. 2015, we have Jameis, Winston, and Marcus Mariota. And not only were they the top 2 quarterbacks taken in that year's draft, they were the top 2 players taken in that year's draft. And Jameis Winston has, just like Andrew Luck, some really good throws, and then he has some really bad throws. So if he would have been taken, say, dead last in the draft, you would look at him and say, well, he was drafted last, so what do you expect? But when you're drafted number 1 overall, people expect more than basically a backup quarterback. And then Marcus Mariota is more than likely probably going to be the starting quarterback this year for the Falcons since they traded Matt Ryan. That's got to be a blow to Matt Ryan's ego that you've put up all those great numbers like he has for 15 years. And then you get traded for 1 draft pick. And Marcus Mariota has never done anything of relevance. But like I said a couple of weeks ago, there's no good quarterbacks in this year's draft. So there's just nobody worth drafting. So if you're going to trade Matt Ryan and sign Marcus Mariota, to me that's a sign that Marcus is going to be your starting quarterback for 1 year and you're going to draft somebody next year. 2016, we have Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, and Paxton Lynch. Now, Jared Goff did reach the Super Bowl, but outside of that, he hasn't done a whole lot. He hasn't been great, but he hasn't been terrible, but definitely not worthy of a first-round draft pick. And then Carson Wentz had 1 good season with the Eagles when Frank Reich was their offensive play caller. But outside of that, he hasn't done a whole lot. And Paxton Lynch is just a waste of a draft pick. And then 2017, we have Mitchell Trubisky. And then we have Patrick Mahomes and Desean Watson. Now, Patrick Mahomes was drafted 10th. And Desean Watson was drafted 12th. And to me, that's just more proof that the NFL has no idea how to scout quarterbacks, because you drafted Mitchell Trubisky ahead of Patrick Mahomes and Desean Watson. Now, some people are already claiming that Patrick Mahomes is going to be the best quarterback of all time. I don't believe that. I don't think he's that good. I think had he played back in the 90s, before all the rules favored the quarterbacks, he wouldn't be putting up the numbers he's putting up. But since the NFL this day and time is all about offense, all about the quarterbacks, his numbers look really impressive. And if he keeps putting up these numbers, if you're just a stats junkie, he will be the greatest quarterback of all time because he's probably going to be top 5 in touchdowns, top 5 in passing yards, top 5 in completions. But if you look at the totality of his career and not just stats, Mahomes is probably going to be top 10, top 5, but he's not the best, but he's definitely better than Mitchell Trubisky. But with Mitchell Trubisky going that high in the draft, to me it just shows that these NFL scouts look too much at somebody's height or somebody's weight and not enough in their actual playing style. Because even when Trubisky played at North Carolina, they were talking about, oh, he's going to be a top 5 NFL draft pick. I personally watched him and I thought, why? What's he done? Just because you're 9'12" does not mean you're going to be a great quarterback. I didn't see it 5 years ago. I don't see it now. 2018, we had Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, and Lamar Jackson. Now, Josh Rosen is he's just a waste of space. Josh Allen's done some great things so far. Sam Darnold has a big head, but outside of that, he ain't done a whole lot. And Baker Mayfield's had a good career, but not a great career. Lamar Jackson's been really, really good. If he can learn to throw the ball more consistently, he could be a great quarterback. But all these years later, he still cannot throw the ball more than 10 yards downfield with any consistency whatsoever. 2019, we had Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones, and Dwayne Haskins. Now, Dwayne Haskins is he ain't even worth talking about. But Kyler Murray has been good, not great. Daniel Jones has been decent. And then 2020, we have Joe Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, and Jordan Love. Again, the NFL draft comes up Thursday, April 28th through Saturday, April the 30th. And if anybody has any ideas, any thoughts on any of these quarterbacks, please feel free to let me know. But how can all these NFL scouts for all these years be this bad at watching quarterbacks and determining who's good and who's not? And like I said, I don't think they do. I think most of them, they look at height, they look at weight, they look at maybe arm strength, and that's all they look at. Because how many years did we hear Drew Brees can never be a quarterback? He's too small. And look how long he was not only a good quarterback, but a great quarterback. And then you see all these quarterbacks that get drafted because they're tall, and every one of them suck. So just because you're tall doesn't mean you're going to be great. Just because you're short doesn't mean you're going to suck. There's more to being a quarterback than just being short or just being tall. But I think they look at height and weight and say, he's good because he's tall. He sucks because he's short. And that's not what makes a good quarterback. Just like all the college basketball people now are having Gonzaga player Chet Holmgren supposedly going number 1 in the NBA draft if he chooses to come out, which more than likely he will. And I'm not saying that Chet Holmgren won't go number 1, but they only want Chet Holmgren number 1 because, yes, he can shoot free throws. He can shoot from the outside. He can shoot from the perimeter. He's a good rebounder. He's got all that. And he's 9'12" with a 14-foot wingspan. But dude weighs 125 pounds soaking wet. It doesn't matter if you're 9'12" with a 14-foot wingspan. When you're that skinny, you're not going to post up on anybody. So if Chet Holmgren has any sense whatsoever, he will go back to college for another year. Because if you're 9'12", 120 pounds in the NBA, going up against guys like Giannis, you're going to get absolutely destroyed. So height does not always matter. Again, any thoughts on this, please feel free to let me know. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. Why haven't aliens visited our solar system yet? They look at the reviews. Only 1 star. And that wraps it up for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.